Why the hell do you make such long videos? You're boring. Can you speak faster? Hi, Misha here, and I thought I would address those honestly legitimate comments or complaints in a video. Why not? Kind of explaining what I do, why, my limitations, of course, and just, why videos have gotten longer over the years on this channel. Because believe it or not, I usually set out to make a 10 or 15 minute video, and it never stays that way. Why? Well, for no particular reason or purpose, I put out 6 guns that kind of represent the phases, types of guns I've been into, just generally speaking, representative. And so we'll go through them. I'll talk a bit, hang out with you, that kind of thing. But if you can stand it, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. But if you'd like to help support, there's always the Patreon. So, yeah, let's go back in time to bolt-action rifles. Clearing the deck a bit so we can talk about bolt actions. And there were 2 kind of main contenders that I've ended up specializing in over the years. British Enfields, Japanese Arasakas. But I decided to bring out a Type 99, one of my better examples, because this is something that I have always tried to fill a niche online. There just aren't that many detailed Arasaka videos. And these would be among my first kind of long form videos going back years, because I just got fascinated in all the variants and types and subtypes. Now, obviously, I cannot see markings. But what's kind of nice about Japanese guns, while markings series do matter, a lot of the differences have to do with features. And that's really what enthralled me. Like a lot of us, I probably first heard about Arasakas through 80s and 90s gun magazines, and really the old Tales of the Gun episode from, 94, 95 on the History Channel back when it was good. And they just fascinated me. And in the beginning, I really just wanted to get maybe an early and a late Type 99, and then a Type 38, to have one 6.5 and a couple of 7.7s. But they were very affordable back in the 90s and early 2000s, especially compared to Mausers. So I just dove in, and not finding a lot of great resources online, and being fortunate enough to meet a lot of the old-time collectors from the old Bonsai group and other things, I just started wanting to share what I learned. That's part of who I am. I like collecting, I like finding info, but to me, what's the point of doing that if you can't share the joy, share the learning experience with other people? And yeah, when I made videos 10, 15 years ago, they were relatively short because my information was relatively light. But as time has gone on, and I've accumulated both first-hand and third-hand documented type resources, and my list has just gotten longer and longer. And when I do a video, I don't feel right not sharing everything I know. And then, of course, as time goes on, more gets added to that, or I get to make corrections. And I will make and do and have made mistakes because, especially with Japanese, we're going kind of on anecdotal evidence. We don't really have records. Firebombing a nation will kind of eliminate a lot of paper records. But these have always fascinated me. And they're actually very good guns, too. Unfortunately, they fire a relatively hard-to-find cartridge. In fact, it's a little easier to get today, thanks to a few import brands, than it was when I was young. When I was young, it was pretty much Norma, which cost the same back then as it does today, which, adjusting for inflation, really tells you something. I also really got into Enfields, and 303 was much more available. And one of my earlier pickups was a 1903 A3, so I'm definitely into American stuff, but I also know that that's not my specialty, because a lot of what makes American guns are the markings, and that's great. I just can't see to do that, and I don't want to present myself as an expert on something that I can't visually confirm, guys. Luckily, again, with Japanese, a lot of it's feature stuff, like the steel butt plate, the gnarled safety on this gun, the AA sights, the monopod, and I can feel the very nice bluing that they did on these, not to mention the lacquered stock. And for the series, I can always bother my wife to read it, something she oh so much loves and enjoys. But no, bolt actions were among my first loves, and I really do enjoy sharing with them. I did actually used to shoot bolt actions quite a bit because the ammo is available, the guns are available. I don't fire them as much these days. Part of it is just the cost of the guns. Part of it's time. Part of it's the lack of ammo for a lot of these. But when I started off late 90s, early 2000s, I actually did fire quite a few. But if I'm going to fire a gun like this, a Japanese, I probably wouldn't use this one. I'd probably use a mid-war example. Why risk bluing wear, tear, breaking apart on a nicer gun because they're going to shoot the same? But most of these now are just kind of retired to collectibles for study in my collection. But yeah, that's kind of why videos get longer and longer. I would apologize, and sometimes I feel bad for it, but, you know, I gotta be me, guy. And, you know, to thy own self be true, Shakespeare. And that's what interests me. And I think I really got into the Japanese and to a lesser extent the British because when I was younger, a lot of people were focusing on the American stuff. And that's great. I really like American stuff, but other people kind of had that niche. Another one I kind of got into to a lesser extent were Carcanos or Carcani. But yeah, I thought this was a good representation, and I would say of my bolt action work on YouTube here, I'm most proud of my Japanese. So yeah, if interested, check out the backlog. At first it might seem boring, but you might find yourself more enthralled than you think. Actually, I remember when I met Jay pretty early on, probably 2011, 2012, he kind of didn't understand why I had so many Arasakas, so one night I just got out a bunch of vodka and got out to the gun safe and kind of got him intrigued when he kind of got in the right mindset. And sometimes that's the case, or sometimes not. It just depends. But to each their own, and this is mine. Keeping on with the Milsurp theme, I thought I'd bring out a self-loading gun. Recently did a video on self-loaders, and I actually already had an M1 Grand pulled out, which is probably the first in this type I ever shot at the age of like 6 or 7. But I decided to put that back and bring out the SVT-40, specifically this one, because this is one of my best gun show finds. I've told the story before, but hey, we're hanging out, right? I didn't initially know there was a Tokarev rifle when I was getting into guns. But actually, Jaro's father told me about them early on, and knowing about the Tokarev pistol, I thought, cool. Not knowing how hard they would be to find. Now, a relatively large batch came in from Finland, back by Inner Arms years ago, and then another batch came in by Century from Russia. But in '94, these were banned from further import during a bilateral agreement between the U.S. and Russia. They really weren't supposed to be, but they were accidentally not left on the list of accepted guns that could still come in. This is when we would end up with later guns from Russia. But oh well. So importation effectively ended in 1994. Prices were rising. I found this gun about 10 years after that, maybe 2002, 2003, 2004, during that period, at which time they were not crazy money, but 600, 700, 800 maybe. We went to a gun show, relatively small one, and there was a dealer there who had bought out an old gun shop. Now this dealer, to his credit, said, I'm not into military guns. That might sound strange today, guys, but even back then, a lot of dealers weren't. The love of military guns kind of came in with my generation, Gen X, and the millennials, and even Gen Z. So he just wanted to move the guns that he got, and he had what the guy originally paid from Century Arms. And he had, for example, a Finnish M39 he wanted $75, $80 for. He had a nice Enfield in the wrap, number 4, that he wanted the princely sum of, I think, $125 for. He had an FN49 with the sniper, and he had this. And I've been looking for one and immediately found it and had my hands on it. It's one of those guns, it was on the rack, grabbed it, and did not let it out of my hands. And so I asked the guy, what do you want for it? $199.87, which is what Century charged these shipped. My family member with me decided it would be fun to try to dicker with him. That's fine sometimes, but when you got a good deal, you just do it. And I pretty much kicked under the table and said, we'll take it. And we ended up taking several other guns from him that day, so it was worth everyone's time. Made me happy, made him happy, and essentially this was as it was received from Century when I got it. And even though this has been an odd place in history type gun, it's unique and special, and a nice piece of World War II history, or Great Patriotic War. Goes to show you, quite early on in my life, even before I first went to Russia, I was interested in Russian history. When I was younger, I went to church quite a bit, and one of my youth pastors ran into me in college years later after I'd been to Russia a few times. And he, hey, what are you up to? And I explained, and I said, yeah, I was in Russia, I'm going back. And he kind of looked at me and goes, yeah, that makes sense. And we had a good laugh. So apparently I showed signs of it even when I was a kid. Who knew? But yeah, I just wanted this because it was a neat little piece of history, and it was an obscure gun. I also ended up with an AG-42, FN-49, a few others from that generation, and of course an M1 Grand or two. Some of them, like my 42 and this one, are my originals. Others, like my FN-49, have been cycled through the years. These are guns that I've shot once or twice, but don't really get them as shooters, especially my G43s, because you cannot get spare parts. And these guns, well, they made it through a war, and they weren't really built to last. They were built because of a need, both in Germany and Russia. But I think it's really interesting, and that was another point of this channel, to bring lesser-known guns. And like with the Arisaka, I've had a lot of fun really getting into the details of this because there were a lot of production changes for the SVT. I could do a short video saying this is the SVT, it's your short stroke gas piston, tilting bolt. But other people can and do that. I don't want to imitate or repeat what others have said. I want to bring something new and worthwhile to the table. And for me, it's talking more about the history, about Stalin and Tokarev and Simonov and that whole thing. It's also about looking at all the variations, like in the trigger group, the SVT versus the AVT, the different magazine styles, the different styles of rear sight, the different styles of sheet metal front handguard or muzzle brake. That takes time. Now, I would love to actually bring in more pictures and do that, but as you know, I simply can't, guys. I wish I could. I'm aware of that shortcoming. For those who put up with it, I greatly appreciate you and it. But, I do have some help from time to time, but most of what you see on this channel that are my videos, I do the work. Now, of course, when Jay did his videos, those were his, and when Fox does his, those are his videos. And when there's something big and important, I'll get someone like J-Ro to come in and actually do professional editing. But when you put out 2-3 videos a week, every week, for over a decade, you can't afford that because there's just not the income. Heck, we didn't even start monetizing until a couple of years ago because this wasn't and still really isn't about money. It's about sharing. And that's what I want to do with you. Unfortunately, sharing takes time. But I feel like I can give you more time and more detail with my guns, and I hope that helps others. And once in a while, I'll get an email of someone saying that, yeah, my video helped them buy a gun or not buy a gun because they saw something was wrong. And actually, just recently, I got a video, or rather an email, talking about my video on our next gun. So let's kind of move into the 1950s. While I like World War I and World War II history quite a bit, what really piques my interest is the Cold War history. And the right arm of the free world was the FN-FAL. Now, I'm also interested in other 7.62 battle rifles, as you've seen recently, the G3. I love the Beretta BM59, even like some aspects of the M14, but the FAL series was my jam, even before the AK. Now, of course, I fired an AR as a child, so long before an FAL. This is one of my adult discoveries, and I go back and forth, but probably my single favorite FAL It's actually my L1A1 SLR. And like I said recently, someone emailed me saying that my video helped them when they were getting, well, for a graduation gift, one of these. And these are cool because they're real L1A1s made by BSA. A few hundred came in, maybe 200, maybe a little more, in the early 90s for police use. And the reason that they were allowed in, for one, because the ATF just classed them as Title I guns. For another, the L1A1 SLR was always technically a semi-automatic self-loading gun, hence the SLR. And this is one of the few times when an import mark, which is on the underside of the barrel from Century, is a good thing. It's nice to have it there to know that these are legitimate. FALs are weird. Quite a few have kind of snuck in that maybe other guns would not have been allowed. The G series is quite famous. But then there were other sear cut guns, so-called, in the 70s that I think it was Browning or Gun South brought over, maybe Steyr, I don't know. But they were FN guns, and they were kind of grandfathered in too. And this is another one. It's hard to imagine someone wanting one of these to convert to full auto anyway. But, yeah, I really, really like the FAL, or in this case, the inch pattern. What to say about it? It is just, it's cool. And there's so much history. These guns were used by another aspect of my channel, cats. That is Hobo the cat, by the way. But, she doesn't like when I'm out here recording. Inch mags. Just, they're a lot of fun, a lot of history. You might say they're a little big for what they are. That's arguable. I mean, originally the Brits were going to do them in more of an intermediate cartridge. It was America who stepped in and kind of made 30 caliber light rifle, 7.62 by 51. Interesting piece in history. And another thing that was an early thing, I did multiple part FAL series, and it's something that I want to revisit, even if I don't have any new FALs to show you. I was fortunate enough to just be at the right place and time, or at least towards the second half of it, when the FAL kits, and by extension receivers, were coming in. The kits really started flowing in the 90s and, you know, up through the early 2000s. I do have kit builds, but when I can get an original, I will. But what's funny is, even though this is an original gun, all in all, they don't bring near what the G series do, which is actually a converted gun, a semi-automatic gun. I think a lot of that has to do with exposure. People know about the G series more. Again, part of the channel is bringing lesser-known firearms to bear and sharing. But maybe another reason that I really like the FAL series are just the people I met because of it. And I certainly have met some great people because of these. As I've told before, J-Ro's father, again, was the first to really got me into FN FALs. We had come in one day after I met J-Ro, and he introduced me to his dad. We'd been out, I think, actually shooting at the cabin, and his dad had been working on an FAL build, and he put it in my hands, and I immediately thought, no, that's a real gun. And I ran across a few others. Interestingly, while his father had built some metric guns and helped me do my first STG-58, he'd never actually built an L1A1 an inch pattern, but he figured it out and we built one together. And I kept it for a long time. It was on a U.S. receiver, but when this came along through another friend, Hover Mail of Honey Creek Industries, who I've known 20 years too, he always ended up with a couple of these, and I got this one from him. I actually saved it because he wanted to refinish it. I said, no, leave it alone. The Sunkerite paint wear is part of its history. That's what they are, repainting it, refinishing these. Yeah, they wouldn't destroy the value. It's still a British-made parts thing, but no, leave it alone. The scratches on the furniture match the wear, and I do like guns with sincere wear and tear. I don't mind kit builds, I don't mind rebuilds or new production, but this is a surplus gun, and that's just neat to me. Yeah, I really like this era in guns. Steel and wood usually, or in this case, steel and melanite. And that's often where I get off on story times, just like now. In but I like sharing my gun stories with you, and I hope you enjoy those, because that's what it's about for me. As I've said many times, and I'll always say, it's the community. It's going out to shoot. It's learning, doing builds with people. It's sharing new discoveries with people, or in sharing with people as they discover new guns. That's great to me, that sense of community, and I hope it never goes away. And while forums are fine and good, and I like them, in person, it's so much richer. And I was fortunate enough to kind of get in when that was still very much a thing. While some may not know my love of the FAL, I think the AK's place on this channel is known. In fact, that's kind of what I've become known for, and it was absolutely not intentional. Not exactly by accident either. But, well, kind of like with the Arisakas, no one else was doing it. Guys, back 20 years ago, AKs were not collectible. In fact, during the assault weapons ban, this type of gun wasn't super collectible because you couldn't really have the features like a folding stock. It wasn't until after September 2004 that AKs and other type guns became interesting. Nevertheless, I was an early adopter of the AK. Well, not early, that's not correct, but earlier than some. I was an early adopter of 545, though. I picked up a Romanian SAR2 about as quickly as I could. The problem is, back then, I did not have the money. It took me 6 months to save up. And that's something I should point out, too. Just because a gun is on this channel, it doesn't mean it's mine. Or even if it was mine then, doesn't mean I hung on to it, because I'm not wealthy. But sometimes, like recently with that HK93, a friend offers to share one, and it goes on. Or sometimes a gun is Fox's, or in the past Jay's, and, they come on. Or sometimes I'll have a gun for a while, and then move it along to get something better. Now, the obvious choice to bring out would have been my Romanian SAR1. A, shall we say, storied gun that has been mentioned multiple times. Easy answer, but I thought, let's do something a little more interesting here. And so I brought out a Mod-E, the gun I didn't buy back when the SARs were available. I could either buy one or two at the gun store, and I went with the SAR1. To be fair, those were Misser Mod-Es, later centuries. This is an earlier ARM, which actually I picked up locally on a trade. And, some might think, why not get a pre-ban Steyr? And if there were benefits to a pre-ban, I would. But I'm not about that. I'm not about the bragging rights, or I've got a pre-ban, I've got this or that. What I want is the closest to military, or maybe just best built or whatever. And in my humble opinion, a pre-ban Mod-E isn't really any better finished, better built than an early post-ban like this N-Track. The N-Tracks even still have threaded barrels. The only real difference are the wings of the bayonet being shaved off. So sometimes I will make compromises like that. And that actually allows me to get more guns because I don't necessarily have to have the best. If I held that for a pre-ban, I would have paid double, and that meant I probably couldn't have another AK. By being willing to compromise a little bit, I'm still happy, and I had money left over, and it was a good local trade. And I do like the military guns. Or rather, I do like imports. There and again, I don't recommend imports because we're firearms snobs. I promise that's not it. It's because they're here today, gone tomorrow. And we've seen too many examples of this time and time again. If you're happy with a PSA, that's great. But remember, when I got into AKs, there really were no American-made AKs. At most, you had original parts being assembled here by American companies, and I do have those. But if you can get a real import, for one thing, back in the day, they were often cheaper than a kit build because foreign labor versus domestic. And even if they weren't the prettiest fit and finish, they worked. And that's something that really is a video in and of itself, but sometimes I think the modern expectations of AKs are Well, they're very, very different than the expectations that I grew up with. The AKs were kind of meant to be rough and ready, and that's what attracted me to them. Plus, of course, the connection to the USSR. A lot can be said, and kind of like everything else, I've gotten into the history, the details. As I've learned about them, I've shared because at that time, very few others were really getting into, say, Romanian AK variants, or yes, Egyptian. The only AKs that were getting attention by collectors were the Chinese, and that might explain partially why I don't specialize in Chinese. I like them, I own 3 or 4, but they're not my specialty. Yeah, I've kind of found my niche, and I really enjoy it. It tends to be Romanian, Polish, or even kind of off-the-wall guns like the Valmets, or not even AKs at all, like the VZ58, a gun that I desperately love and enjoy, and almost made it onto the table today, but this video is about why I don't make long videos. I don't want to make it any longer than it has to be, and we've had plenty of AK content, but it's part of the channel and something I'm happy to share. I can't tell you about accuracy or sighting. For that, I do need help from people like Jay or Fox or J-Ro, and so when they can pitch in with the accuracy reports, I greatly appreciated. What I can tell you is the history, the mechanics, and I can show you how reliable a gun is. That I can do. Again, guys, I have my own limitations, but I try to make up for them by delivering information, detail that maybe others have more pressing things in life and cannot do. To that end, not just about AKs. Again, far from it. I really do, sincerely, no lie, like the AR-15. Which AR to pick? SP1 would be an easy one to go for. After all, not the one I own today, but an SP1 was the first AR ever shot or held. Yes, to me, as a kid, it was the Rambo gun, even though it wasn't exactly what he had. But back then, in the 80s, not many people had AR-15s. And again, there's only 1 or 2 makers. There was Colt officially, and then some unlicensed ones, like Sendra, that weren't great. In the 90s, there was a bit of an explosion. Bushmaster was kind of at the head of that. But also in the 90s, you had the assault weapons ban. So the AR had to be neutered. And that didn't matter so much to the full-length rifle, but all you had to really change. No removable flash hider, no bayonet lug. Plenty of pre-ban magazines and to round even during the ban. They never were too expensive. Where it really hit was when the M4 came out. Now, the M4 wasn't adopted until 95 and really didn't start to see military service for a few years after. And that was the first truly successful carbine. And not being able to have a collapsing stock on it sucked. Although some makers did put a non-collapsing version on for the right look, but that was just kind of doofy. My first AR that I bought myself, well, I tried buying one in 2000, but it didn't go through. In the end, it was actually a good deal that it didn't go through because it was way too expensive. And then I bought a Wilson Combat because they're near me in Berryville, and saved up again for it all semester and picked it up in 2002, I believe. 2003? No, I believe it was 2. Anyway, still during the ban, but just like with the AK, the end of the ban let the AR boom. And I really enjoyed the AR, the fact that 223 was so gettable. People used to mock it as a just a 22 LR cartridge. No, it's not. It's like saying 7.62 NATO is just a 30 caliber 30-30 cartridge. No, there's differences. But of course, the modern guns came in, and the concept of the MSR, modern sporting rifle, came in, and I started to see guns like these get widespread acceptance, even being in Walmart for a time, and that was cool. But if you follow me, you know I'm not a tactical person, and that's not a condemnation of it. I really appreciate it when Fox and Jay in the past would do tactical AR videos, and I don't think even if I could see that would change much. It just doesn't quite speak to me. But a gun like this, an M16A1 build does. And so I was thrilled when the whole retro AR movement started to come in about 15 years ago. And I picked this particular gun because it was my first, or rather part of it was. This upper I picked up, and it's actually one of the surplus uppers that were actually a wash for a couple $100 about 20 years ago. And at the time, I just put it on a generic A2 lower, not really understanding or appreciating the difference between A1 and A2. Years later, I would get it, and then I would put it on an A1. And also, when I first got it, it came with an E1 stock, but since it's a A1 type upper, I eventually put a A1 correct stock on it. You know, and that goes to show you, when you do retro builds, it's a matter of degree. How far do you want to take it? For example, this one, it's black, but that's how it came from the arsenal, and it has an A2, there we go, port door. That's how I got it. That's how it came. Probably the original got bent. Could I put an A1 on it? Sure. But it shoots well. I love how lightweight it is. And for the era I grew up in, the connection to Vietnam is strong. I like the A2 as well. I like the A4. The A4 and the M4A1 Block 1 are about as tactical as I get personally. And I don't believe that would change, because even if I could see, I think I would still appreciate history and simplicity, and I love keep it simple guns. And not much more keep it simple than the original AR, either the SP1 or the M16. But that's kind of what this channel brings. That's my little niche. I was doing retro ARs before that was the cool thing to do. Back then, you couldn't get very many retro parts. Luckily, Nodak Spud was making some. But of course, original parts were still available. Of course, today, at least for a while, Brownells had quite a few. I hope they bring those back. But that's just kind of my little niche. There's plenty of other people that ARs, they live and breathe. For example, Chris Bartacci, Small Arms Solutions. And there's plenty of people that do high caliber, high grade shooting. You can check those out. Again, just trying to find my place, find my niche. And I think this AR represents it real well. This is my type of AR. And I do go into history about these. Recently recorded a relook at carbines. Yet again, as I always do, I was supposed to be a 15-minute video. Ended up being over an hour because I had more information about carbines than I did last time, and I just really enjoy talking about them. And I think it's worth preserving AR history, how we got this gun. And when you kind of understand where it came from, the mechanics become more defined as well. Speaking of mechanics, we've got one more gun to get to, and it could have been a lot of things, but this is the one I picked for pretty obvious reasons. And our final gun, kind of representing just weird imports. It could have been a lot of things. T91 from, could have been a good example from Taiwan. The Hellion from Croatia we featured quite a bit lately. But another gun, or at least series of guns that have become a little known for, the Swiss SIG series. So I brought out the original, the PE90, which is the version of the 5.5.0, sold in Switzerland and now sold in the USA, but once very rare. I left the AR and the AK out just because this really does kind of combine both, which, to be fair, was kind of part of it. The first I ever really, if I'm being honest, heard about these guns is when the SIG 5.5.6 was being released. A friend at the time who I had done a lot of trading for FN guns, for example, an early FS 2000 with, he told me about the SIG 5.5.6 coming out. So they weren't out yet, but they were coming. So I think it was around 2005, maybe early 6. It was post Assault Weapons ban because we could get features. And that was really the first inclination I had about these. At least any thought. I probably saw them in passing, but the original pre-ban guns were A, very rare, and B, very expensive. 10K back then. This is one of the few import type guns that, thanks to JDI and imports, have come down in price. Also, Trident's imported some and so on. So it's actually been, over the last few years, the heyday to get these. Before, your options were very limited. And it's a shame because it's a very nice gun to shoot, but at the pre-ban prices, you just could not. And, you know, finding the 5.50s was hard enough. Forget about the 5.51s. Those were 15K plus. So I kind of got into them via the US ones, as a lot of people did. And it was Mike over at Colorado Gun Sales that really talked me into how the Swiss guns were different and, frankly, better than the US ones. And, of course, I was involved with the SIG 5.51A1 when CD&N thought they had an exclusive with Sig Sauer USA. That didn't work out, but that led to JNI's first video, as I'm sure you know. And it all went on from there. And then, of course, I met Mike Ott, Michael's Machines, M, not to be confused with M+M, who was Colorado Gun Sales, who imported the first brand new production 5.53 pistols, the first time those had ever come in, around 2013. But Mike Ott of MM had those Louisiana Wildlife Fish and Game 5.51s. And I just was positioned well, and they were a lot of money, but compared to pre-ban prices, shoot, those are cheap 5.51s. And so I was already really getting into these when JDI came onto the scene around 2016. And this gun here was actually a bit of a Christmas gift from Dave over there some years ago. Nowadays, the PE90 types are pretty common here, but back then, there really weren't that many. And it's a gun I really, really enjoy. And as exhibited right there, my pauses, people kind of have complained about that. Unfortunately, it's just it's a talking thing. Part of it is to breathe, because we need to breathe. Part of it is to let my mouth rest for a minute. Boy, that couldn't be taken out of context. And part of it is these videos, any of them, are not scripted. So it's kind of collecting my thoughts and figuring out what I want to say next, or remembering if I forgot to, forgetting to remember, remembering to forget type stuff. I will say in front of the camera, I find it less of an issue. When I'm thinking about holding the camera and talking, it's more things on my mind, and like a lot of us, I'm pretty single-minded, single-track, so trying to do multiple things does it. So sorry for the pauses, it is what it is. Personally, what annoys me even more than pauses when people talk, or really, really bad jump cuts. Not good ones. Good jump cuts are great. But some videos out there are just really bad sounding jump cuts. And those super bug me. Sorry, just what it is. And this is a very natural channel. It's not commercial. It's not sponsored. Just me rambling on about guns. And a lot of times, yeah, Swiss guns. Also, stopping to flip over gives me time to think. And I wanted to mention again, this is stuff that's either ours or loaned to us, whatever, not T&E. And I'm not rich, as I said. For example, getting one of these was a lot of things going on. The 5.56s led to the 5.51A1, and then those went up in price, and I sold it to get one of the Louisiana guns, and then sold it once those dried up. Trading up, and that's part of it too. I have been an FFLD, or a licensed firearm dealer, since 2009. So, yeah, I try to keep my job here and my job there separate. I don't want this to be an advertising company. But if a cool gun comes in the gun shop, I will definitely show it to you. But it's not here to sell. In fact, usually if I have a gun like that, I won't even release the video on YouTube until after the gun has already sold in the store. That way there's not really a chance of conflict of interest. But, being able to put my time and energy is what allows me to get guns. And to me, they're investments, of course. They're kind of my retirement fund a bit. And sometimes I'll keep a gun for a mid-range. We call them sticker backers, and then sell it whenever, money's needed, bills come due. Good example recently was one of the Benelli M3 law enforcements. Sat on it for about a year, but it's the last one and kind of needed to pay some credit cards, so put it up, sold it, great stuff. So some of the Swiss guns have been that way, and definitely most of the Swiss guns you've seen on this channel, especially the colored ones like the Arctics, aren't keepers. I just want to show you. I only keep the ones that are kind of military and that really speak to me the most. I do have to be picky. I do have to be choosy. I'm sure you completely understand why. But over the years, working, it does pay off eventually. But the YouTube channel, again, is just to share the love of guns. And our attitude's always been, we're going to go out shooting regardless. Might as well bring a camera, record it, and put it on YouTube, as much as YouTube will allow us. Why not? And some ways that's good, some ways it's bad. It has kind of grown into more of a job than we originally anticipated. That was one of the many reasons Jay left. Just it became a thing. I'm stubborn, so I've stuck with it, probably more than I should. But I do it because I want to, and I don't give up on things. And I hope, and I try to bring a unique perspective, and also kind of show that the gun community isn't all the same. Not that there's anything wrong with the way other people do things, not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. My idea is there's goodness in diversity. There's goodness in having different walks of life, of people sharing a hobby, not just guns, but anything. And yeah, just because I'm disabled, so what? It brings me joy. I do it safely. I've shot guns for well over 30 years in my life. Never once have had an accident because I'm careful. And that's very important as well. But yeah, weird European imports. And I try to get in when they're good, and it's one of the few guns that's come down, but as I said with the AKs, don't expect that forever. These will eventually dry up and prices will go up again, but in a lot of ways, guys, people idealize the 80s as the golden age, but frankly, we've been living in a great time for firearms ever since the end of the assault weapons ban, and that's another thing to appreciate for my style and maybe your style of gun too. Probably not the best time if you're into lever actions or revolvers, because those have become harder to find and harder to get, but it's not really what we're up for. But yeah, we just kind of do what we like and try to show you weird, rare stuff, and this seemed like a good example. And videos on these have gotten longer and longer as I've learned more and more. A lot of my info here is either firsthand from shooting them over the years or direct from SIG in Switzerland. And I do like how it combines some of the best features of these two guns, plus a little bit from the HK besides. And frankly, HK kind of copied them on things like the stock for their G36, so it goes around. So what do you think? Does that maybe explain me and why I do a little more? Or was this just another long video with no rambling points and way too many pauses? Let me know. Alrighty, and ending where we began. I hope that was kind of illuminating, helpful. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. It just seemed like an interesting topic for a video, to my mind. Getting to know me better, kind of explaining that I am aware of my shortcomings, and they're what they are. So, those who have hung out and stayed with me, appreciate it. As I said at the beginning, if you could, please like, share, subscribe, and definitely check out some of the older videos. And if you'd like me to revisit some, especially the old military guns, let me know. And again, if you could help us out over on Patreon, $1 a month is great, but if you can't, I understand. With that, this is Misha, and on behalf of Fox and the rest, we'll catch you very soon next time.